Good morning, Hannah Lewis, and good morning, Paul Phillips.
Morning, Yoni.
Good morning. Thank you so much for agreeing to this today. Today I'm interviewing Paul Phillips, who is the member of St. John's Wood Synagogue and chairman of the Holocaust Educational Trust, and Hannah Lewis, who is also from St. John's Wood and a Holocaust survivor. And I'm very grateful to you both. Today is Yom Hashoah, the day that commemorates the Holocaust and remembers the victims of the Holocaust. And I thought it would be appropriate to dedicate my interview today to this. Even though my interview series is really here to raise people's spirits, I think, Hannah, people hearing your story and your zest for life will certainly raise people's spirits. So I'm very grateful to you for finding the time to allow me to interview you. If I could ask you, first of all, Paul, if you want to just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself. I know your CV is very exciting and you've been very involved with Holocaust really throughout your life, Holocaust studies, whether that was the Hebrew U or in the 80s, the 90s, and now what you do for the Holocaust Education Trust. Give us a brief overview of the type of work that you do and how it's been to be the chairman of the Holocaust Education Trust.
Well, thanks, Yoni. Yeah, so going back to 1975, I was 17 studying Nazi Germany and the Holocaust at Hebrew University. And what I realized after having studied it for 1 year was that back then, in the era of the Soviet Union, the Holocaust was very much a backwater subject. The total enormity of it, the calamity that befell all of humanity, which is what the Holocaust did, was simply not a fully appreciated subject by the non-Jewish world, particularly at large. And when I came back, started work in business, which was the property development business in the late 70s, early 80s, I was always minded to try and become involved to some degree in how the message of the Holocaust and how it can be taught and the lessons can be learned from it could be taught to the wider British community, which particularly meant younger people. And the opportunity for that really arose, I have to say, with the late Greville Janner, Lord Janner, who founded the Holocaust Educational Trust in 1988 and aimed it very squarely at the non-Jewish British school establishment. 5 years later, the Holocaust Educational Trust succeeded in getting Holocaust education on the national curriculum. I became a trustee, one of the youngest trustees, in the mid to late 1990s. There were several survivors on the board at that time, including the late Rabbi Hugo Grin. His son followed, David, for many years. And my work began on that board in basically growing the Holocaust Educational Trust to become the organization it is today, where we reach hundreds, if not thousands of schools, take some 3,000 kids a year to Auschwitz on our specific Lessons from Auschwitz program, where 100 to 150,000 kids a year will listen to a survivor like Hannah, who come to their schools and tell their stories. We provide teacher training. We provide all kinds of particularly online materials for Holocaust education. And we are actually huge in the British school system. And
it really is incredible. Incredible. I must tell you, I myself have been to Poland 6 times as an educator with JFS, and there is something unbelievable about what you can do being there in Auschwitz with the kids. You could never do that in a year's worth of lessons in the classroom. Doesn't compare to a day in Auschwitz with the children. So thank you so much.
No, pleasure. But let me just add something on that specific point, because from our Lessons from Auschwitz program, we create what we call regional ambassadors. So these young kids, not Jewish, in their late teens, will come home. They will go out into their communities, among their family, friends, school communities, and post-school communities, to convey just what their trip to Auschwitz meant for them. So there is an enormous multiplier effect. And I've met many, many of these young regional ambassadors, and they are extraordinary people. And what they do is very much under the radar. I mean, you know, we read the press that we read. You know, you can pick up the JC on Friday and see who hates us this week and all the rest of it. But these people show there are many, many out there who really appreciate where the Jewish people come from and what the Holocaust means.
Incredible. Thank you so much. And please God, you should continue to do your wonderful work for many years to come. And it's people like Hannah who I find so inspiring, who've lived through the horrors of the Holocaust, and they've gone on to build a life for themselves and to share and educate and motivate and inspire generations to come. So I'd like to ask you, Hannah, if you could, please share with us your story. I think everyone's very interested to hear about your story.
Thank you. Well, I was born on the 1st of June 1937 in a small market town in Poland called Włodawa. In fact, Włodawa nad Bugiem, which means Włodawa on the Bug. The other side was Russia. I came from a nice, prosperous, happy family, as far as I can remember. We all lived in the same house. It was a family house, and life was good till the Germans walked in. I remember very clearly the day we were rounded up. In fact, I have a photo which I show when I speak to schools, because I have family photos which really save an awful lot of description, because when I say this is my mother or this is my father, I don't have to describe them or what they look like or anything else. We were literally given an hour to gather up all our belongings. I remember my mother wrapping a dark red shawl with little pink and green flowers on it, and we went to the place we were supposed to go to. And I remember a very long journey. I remember walking and being carried. My grandfather was with us, my uncle Shulker, who was both deaf and mute, his son, my best friend, my cousin Shlomo, who was absolutely the best thing in my life, but he was also deaf and mute, and I always looked after him, and the rest of the family. And my grandfather, who was, I think, the real head of the family. My Uncle Shulker, and we were lucky. We didn't know where we would go, because there were two places that we knew would be consigned to. One was Sobibor, and if we'd been in Sobibor, I would certainly not have survived. And the other one was a workforce labor camp in a little place called Adampol. And it was a long, long walk, but I remember that walk very well, walking, being carried, and so on. And Adampol, when we got there, was a small hamlet. It still is, but the fields just across the way were full of barbed wire, watchtowers, women's sections, men's sections. My Uncle Shulker was taken out immediately. He had a twitch, he talked with his hands. We never saw him again. My grandfather was killed in the first Einsatzgruppen. My father was very brave actually. He managed to find his father's body. I think he must have bribed some Poles. We did a lot, because my grandfather and my father traded with Poles a lot. They had a store. He knew the village elder, which probably saved my life. But he managed to get a sack and managed to find his father's body and smuggled it out into the woods. Somebody must have left him a spade or something, because he buried his father. He went with his cousin, and they made a pledge that if either of them survived, they would come back and disinter my grandfather and bury him in consecrated ground. The cousin didn't make it, but my father did. And I remember after the war, the first thing he did was to have a coffin made and took him on a horse and cart journey to Włodawa to be buried in the cemetery.
Wow.
My father disappeared to the partisans, and my mother and I were in the camp together. And she was amazing. She was always incredibly calm. She got allotted, the old man who was a village elder, and my father had, and my grandfather had dealings with, was in some way involved with the German commandant and so on. I think probably they wanted the Poles to be on their side or whatever, but he asked that my mother and I and my little cousin Shlomo be assigned to work in his home. We would still be in the camp, of course, but we would work for him. I remember working in the fields. I remember picking potatoes. I remember scrubbing floors. I remember scrubbing all sorts of things.
And you were a very young child of what, 4
I was
or 5
a young
years
child.
old?
I was probably 7 when we got there.
Oh, wow.
And I always felt actually safe with my mother. If she was around, that was fine. And I looked after my little cousin Shlomo till the day I lost him. We were outside the camp because the old man's house was in the village. And you grow up very quickly when you're living in those circumstances. And you knew the devils you knew and the devils you didn't know. And there's a rhythm to a camp. And I remember being with Shlomo, probably scrubbing the doorstep, when I saw a whole load of little jeeps coming. And whilst there was time, and I knew there was time, I took his hand, and he knew if I squeezed his hand, he had to follow me. And we ran into the first barn and dived into the, thank you. Sorry, I needed a drink. We dived into the hay, and we did it a couple of times, but this particular time, for some reason, I dived into the hay and he didn't. And I made a little opening and I could see him standing by the door, just cowering by the door. And I couldn't call him because he couldn't hear. And I didn't really know what to do. And I could hear them. And they always, I don't know why I hid in a barn, looking back, they always search barns. That's where partisans used to hide. And that's where they stored things. But I just remember through this little peephole, the door flying open. They picked him up at the scruff of his neck. I saw his feet dangling, and I never saw him again. I think my father obviously was in the partisans and very brave, but it was just my mother and I. Gradually, everybody we knew went. It was a shifting population. People came, disappeared, and went. And the next time I saw my father was the day before my mother died. It was very cold, it was winter, but typhus was rife. And there was no medication, and I wasn't getting better. And I think my mother must have been desperate. And she was allotted to work for this Polish man who was the go-between. And she asked whether for one night, she asked one of his nieces, two nieces, one was sheer poison and the other one was just wonderful and saved my life, whether for one night only we could sleep in the kitchen by something called a pietz. A pietz is an oven, which is really a part of a wall, and it's tiled. And it has an opening, and my mother always used to bake for them, cook for them, and so on. And it stayed warm during the night. And the old man said yes. So she made up a bed for us, and well, as best she could. And we lay down by the oven, and the door was just to the left of where we were, and there was a sort of a series of 6 stone steps, and then you were sort of in the village. And sometime during the night, there was a little tap, tap, tap on the window. And it was so cold that when my mother got up to see what it was, she couldn't wipe it. She couldn't get rid of the frost. So she opened the window a little, and there in the moonlight, I sat up. I saw my father's face. And it was a very quick conversation, but I was wide awake. And he said, "Haya, you must come. Tomorrow there is an action." And she said, "I can't. Anechka's not well." He said, "Bring her with." I asked him afterwards what he said, and he confirmed. She said she won't make it. And whether it was a patrol or whether it was a searchlight, I don't know, but she closed the window and he disappeared. Now, what partisans did, and he was a partisan at that point, was give warning if there was going to be an action somewhere, so people could either hide or just knew about it.
Yeah.
And first thing in the morning, there were the usual sounds of the Einsatzgruppen, the jeeps, the dogs, the shrieks, the yells, the whatever. And we were just lying there. I don't know how long it was. It couldn't be that long. And I don't know why they came to this man's house. Somebody must have tipped them off. And suddenly there was a whack on the door. And I always remember my mother very calmly got on her knees, took me in her arms, gave me a huge hug and a kiss, and with great dignity walked to the door, opened it and closed it behind her. And I waited for her to come back, but she didn't. So I decided to go and look. I was still full of temperature, I suspect. And I stood on the steps, and at first I couldn't see her because there were lots of jeeps and Germans, and they were pushing this way and they were pushing that way. And suddenly I saw her. She was with a whole lot of other people that they had selected. Now, the village didn't have running water, so you got water from the well, and there was a well between the village and the camp. And I always remember my mother, with me trying to help, going to this village, going to this well to draw water. I mean, she must have done it umpteen times a day. You needed water for everything. There was no water in the house. So it was a very familiar sight. And for some reason, they were marshalling them, a whole load of people, to this well. And because my mother was probably one of the last that they rounded up, that they selected, she was in the front row. And I didn't understand it, and I didn't understand why she wasn't. We always made eye contact. She wasn't even looking towards the house. So I decided that maybe I would go to her. And just as I was deciding to do it, and I remember the ice was grey on the steps, somebody barked an order, and they started to shoot. And I saw her fall, and I saw her blood on the snow. And I think that's when I grew up. I knew I mustn't make a sound. I understood immediately why she wasn't looking for me or making contact with me. And then all I can remember was going back and putting myself back on the floor. And when I came to, I was in the nice niece's bedroom, and she was trying to pour warm milk down me, which I immediately threw up, apparently. And she looked after me. I don't know how long I was there, but eventually I went back to the camp. I didn't sleep next to my mother, I slept next to somebody else, but I still went from the camp to the house and the farm, and then back again. And very soon after that, we were being shelled. We were never liberated. The Germans walked out, and I was taken out of a trench by a Russian soldier who gave me a piece of bread, and then he disappeared. And really it was a no man's land, because we were just there. And people came out of the woods telling tales about who had survived and who hadn't, and who they'd seen shot and who they'd seen doing this, that, and the other. But no one came for me. I don't honestly remember how long it was, but suddenly one day, there was my father. Skinny, dirty, but my father. And he didn't know if I'd survived. He knew my mother hadn't. He must have watched it. Because when he got hold of me and we hugged and we kissed and he couldn't believe I was there.
Unbelievable.
In the end, we decided, my father took my hand and we walked out of the village and sat on a stone that told you how many kilometers it was. And I think as a child, you comfort yourself. I decided at one point that my mother didn't really die. She pretended to be dead because it happens sometimes, and that my father was there and he'd probably taken her with him. And that sustained me. Hmm. But sitting on his lap on that stone, I suddenly said to him, "Where's Mama?" And he said, "Anechka, you know Mama's not coming back. You saw Mama die." And I said, no, she pretended to be dead. I thought you were there that night. I literally talked myself into the fact that he had gone and fetched her. And he said, no. And apparently, I remember him shaking me for I don't know how long. I totally didn't respond. I didn't speak. And with a family history of deaf and mute, he was terrified, but obviously I did. But it was a horrible time. I was lucky. My grandfather had 3 sisters in England, and one of them actually sponsored me. I was brought out of Poland by 2 wonderful young men. They were very young then. One was Basil Feldman, who became Lord Feldman, and the other one was Richard Beecham, who were already dealing with Poland. They were selling toys, and they took me out, and we went to Prague for a few days, and then we went to England, and I absolutely hated it.
You hated England?
I hated, yes. My great aunt, I think, and my great uncle deserved a medal. I was a monster. I didn't want to be there. I didn't have a common language. I didn't know anybody. And I think I wanted to go with Rabbi Schonfeld to Israel. He was shipping children out, and the American joined. But I wasn't eligible because I had a father. So they were taking out orphans. But life changed. I settled in England.
How did you rebuild your life after the Holocaust? I mean,
Well,
you speak the Queen's English.
Well, I don't have many talents, but I have a very good ear for language. So in a way it worked against me, because even though I had a very small vocabulary, it sounded very, very right. So if they used words I didn't know, I was lost. But, it was difficult. I think going to school was a big healer, and it was an eye-opener, because in Poland, if you went to a Polish school, you were victimized very often. And this was just a different ball game. So I went to school, I made friends. Nobody ever asked me what happened. This was the extraordinary thing. Until literally I met my husband, who sort of found out, and I gave him little bits of information. My aunt had no idea of what happened in Poland. And nobody who came ever asked me anything. So I didn't say. I didn't start talking about it till I did something for Spielberg. When he did Schindler's List, we did a premiere.
That's when you started talking about it all?
Pardon?
Until then, you hadn't really spoken about it?
Until then, no, nobody asked me.
Wow.
Nobody asked me. Nobody really knew.
Sure.
It was very strange. And so I didn't talk about it. Not even, I was, funny enough, I was talking to a friend of mine, my oldest friend. I knew her when I was 13 and a half, 14. Hadn't been in England very long, but she didn't realize I wasn't English. And people didn't talk about it. That's the strange thing.
So then what made you talk about it? What changed?
I think Schindler's List was the beginning. I identified with the little girl in the red coat. And I think working with Het has been it's very important for me.
Can I just add something here?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Hannah, and we did a joint project with the Shoah Foundation, who took all the testimonies, 52,000 actually, at the time of the launching of Schindler's List, which was 93. Yes. Very shortly after that had been done, we had the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, 1995. And a lot of survivors came forward with their stories for the very first time. It took often 50 years for them to be able to talk about it, whether they're even asked or not. And I think I think that the mid-90s was very much a watershed moment. Plus, we've seen the end of the Soviet Union, the opening up of Eastern Europe, where the crimes had essentially taken place, and an entirely new Holocaust awareness took place, certainly in Britain at that time.
I mean, my children never learned anything about the Holocaust when they went to school. They learned about World War II.
Sure.
They had no idea.
Just to explain to our viewers watching this, so Hannah, you went on to rebuild your life and you got married and you had a family, and you've got 4 children. And how many grandchildren?
I have 8 grandchildren.
Amazing, incredible.
Yeah.
And what is it that motivates you to keep talking about it? Because obviously sitting here this morning, it's painful to tell this harrowing story.
It's always painful. I think it's always painful, and I think we deal with it in our own different ways. I think for me, I'm watching what I'm telling you. So if I don't see it, I don't tell you. And if I were to tell you all of it, you'd be here for hours. But if I haven't spoken for a while, I always find the first 2 or 3 sessions quite difficult.
Sure.
It just, what was very strange is that no one in England seemed to know about it.
Sure. Tell me something, speaking, having lived through the Holocaust, having experienced the trauma that you have, how does that change your views on humanity in general and faith in general? Do you have any brief reflections on that?
Well, I think actually, in a way, it's quite sad because human nature doesn't really change. I mean, look at the massacres all over the world. We haven't sort of learned from that. But I personally have received a lot of nurturing over the years. And I think it was after I started to speak that I acknowledged all sorts of things, even if I haven't spoken about them, that I needed to air to myself. But I've been very lucky.
Sure. Paul, let me ask you a question. You obviously are passionate about Holocaust education. We want to make sure the next generation, whoever they are, whatever walk of life they come from, have an awareness and understanding of the Holocaust and of what took place. In terms of a Holocaust memorial, I know there's a lot of talk about the memorial in Parliament Square. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on memorializing the Holocaust and why that is so important, and any reflections you want to briefly share.
Well, firstly, I think memorializing the Holocaust is important in principle. I mean, we have had, up until now, and still have, a stone in Hyde Park, which you'll do quite well to find, to be honest, to memorialize the Holocaust in the UK at the moment. I mean, regarding Parliament Square, we're very much behind the idea of a Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre, and we will be helping with content for the Learning Centre. Where it goes, I think, is obviously highly controversial and a matter for debate. I don't have a particularly strong view, or if I do, I'm not going to share it right now. I can tell you that the Imperial War Museum are in the process of a major renovation of their Second World War exhibitions, which include the Holocaust exhibition, which has always done outstanding work in that department. I do think, though, having said that, that Parliament Square, for our legislators, for the heart of our democracy, is a fitting place to a large degree for such a memorial. I think it needs to be done with a certain degree of, shall we say, discretion, and I know the plans are being somewhat revised because there has been controversy in that department. But at the end of the day, let's go forward 5 to 10 years' time, when it is up and running and doing what it says on the tin. I think it will be a fine memorial to the nation to remember what actually befell all of humanity not so long ago.
Absolutely. Hannah, I have one final question for you.
Okay.
You know, Yom HaZikaron, its full official name is Yom HaZikaron LaShoah U'Gvura, which means that the day of remembrance of the Holocaust, and also strength, symbolizing the strength of the heroes, the survivors, and the people who live on, and like yourself, and tell their stories. Do you have any messages to share with people who right now are going through challenging times as well? You know, I know there are over 100 members of our community, over 100 members who are by themselves, isolating, at what's a difficult time now, obviously not comparable to the Holocaust, God forbid, but a challenging time. But you are a lady of resilience. Perhaps you have some inspiration or message of hope to share.
Well, I think we will come out of it. I think it will be a very different world. But I think we have to reach for the sun. I think we have to believe, and we have to help to put us back on an even keel. I think what is happening now is so extraordinary. There isn't a sort of a blueprint for what you should do. I think faith is a good thing, but meanwhile, the numbers of people who are dying, and in horrible circumstances sometimes, is mind-blowing and heartbreaking.
Sure.
But I know that it won't last forever, and that the world would continue, and I hope it'll be a kinder world, maybe.
Please God. Well, please God, I hope that things will continue positively, and please God, I hope next year, Parshat Vayechi, we can get Paul for your Bar Mitzvah anniversary to do the...
Well remembered, Yoni.
Maybe you could do the Haftarah that Shabbat, and maybe Hannah, you'll be our guest, come and hear Paul do the Haftarah.
Thanks, Yoni. I'll put it in the diary.
So I'm looking forward to the
Assuming, of course, that we're all out of lockdown by next January.
Please God, please God.
Please God.
If I could just conclude by saying a huge thank you to you, Hannah, for sharing your story. Thank you to you, Paul, for everything that you do for the Holocaust Educational Trust. And please God, we should meet in happy times and good health. And I wish you both well.
Thanks very much, Yoni. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.